and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu filling in for Riz Khan. Is the window for Mideast peace closing? The US failure to reach an agreement with Israel over settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories could be a major blow to the peace process. Since US President Barack Obama took office, he's pushed Israel to halt the building of settlements. The US administration was able to negotiate a 10-month moratorium for the West Bank, but last week Washington announced it was abandoning its call on Israel to extend that freeze on settlement construction. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas insists no negotiation is possible until Israel stops building illegal outposts on occupied land. So today we ask, can the Mideast peace process be salvaged? A reminder, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send us an SMS or email, and of course we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me to discuss these issues are Ali Hassan Abunimah, co-founder of Electronic Intifada, a non-profit online publication that covers the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He is the author of One Country, a Bold Proposal to End the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, which proposes the idea of a one-state solution. Jonathan Sacerdoti, a commentator on Israel and the Middle East. He's worked with many Israel-related groups as a consultant and analyst and travels frequently to the Middle East. He joins us from London. And here in the studio with me is US Congressman Baird, who has been actively campaigning for peace in the region. He's been to Gaza several times. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you to the show. Congressman, let me start with you. The Obama administration, as we've just said, says it's given up trying to pressure the Israeli government to stop settlement building on these illegal occupied territories. What does that mean, giving up?
Well, what they've given up is trying to bribe the Israelis to stop the settlements. It's time to actually exert pressure, in my judgment. We have never, this administration, has made repeated statements that the settlements have to stop, but there's never been any consequences when they've continued. The most recent effort was not a bribe, it was not pressure, it was an offer, as you know, for $3 billion worth of fighter jets, a 90-day cessation of even settlements, but then we would never ask them again to stop, and we would block any efforts in the UN to recognize the Palestinians. It was actually, I think, a shameful and embarrassing effort. I'm glad it failed. I think what we need to do now, but I doubt we will, is tell the Israelis in no uncertain terms that on a progressive basis we are going to gradually withhold various forms of foreign aid, military aid particularly, little by little, until you stop the settlements. There has to be teeth or it's meaningless.
Okay, let's go to Jonathan Sacerdoti in London. Jonathan, isn't it time for Israel to stop building these settlements and move the process forward now?
Hi, Anand. I think that the important thing for us to realize is that settlements shouldn't be an impediment to peace talks. If there is something to be discussed about the validity of building in Jewish areas of population, then that's something that needs to be discussed around a negotiating table. The real problem here is not settlements, but settlement, which is to say that if the Palestinians are reluctant to even sit around a negotiating table with the Israelis when they have repeatedly said that they're willing to do so without preconditions, there can't be any expectation for a peace deal to arise. You can't achieve a peaceful solution to this problem without going through negotiations, and it's time now that the whole world should look at the Palestinians and say, what are you waiting for? Sit round the table and negotiate.
Okay, let's go to Ali Hassan Abunimah. He's in Amman, Jordan. Mr. Abunimah, is this the blame game again? Both sides blaming each other for no progress in these talks, while just sitting back and doing nothing about it?
No, I don't think that people are sitting back and doing nothing. Contrary to Jonathan Sacerdote's sweet words, the reality is there's been now almost 2 decades of so-called peace process and peace negotiations, and the result has been a tripling of the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem, in violation of Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention, in violation of UN Security Council 465, and many others. And I agree completely with Congressman Baird that it's time to start enforcing international law against this outlaw state, which continues to violate it with total impunity. And at a time when American taxpayers are seeing firehouses, libraries, and schools closed because of the financial crisis striking the United States, to continue to give a blank check to a state that violates international law and harms U.S. interests in this way is absolute madness. And I agree with Congressman Baird. We, the United States, an American myself, as a taxpayer, we have never tried to pressure Israel. What we've done is try to bribe them, and enough of the games, enough of the stringing along that Israel does of the international community.
Okay, let me ask Jonathan to respond to that. Jonathan?
Well, again, I can only say that the only thing that's stopping peace negotiations taking place at the moment is the intransigence of the Palestinians. Without an actual desire on the part of the leadership of the Palestinians to sit down and negotiate this, there will be no solution. There can't be a solution. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer of my own country here in Great Britain said, you can't bomb your way to peace with Israel, and you can't murder your way to peace with Israel. The fact of the matter is, the only way, as Hillary Clinton herself just said, the only way that this can be solved is with a two-state solution. Israel is committed to that. Israel has shown it's committed to that. Israel has made plenty of concessions in the past to make peace with Arabs when there has been a partner for those peace talks, and when there has been a partner. Israel has shown its commitment through other episodes where it has in fact negotiated peace. If you'll stop interrupting me, Israel has shown its commitment to making peace with other Arab neighbours. Israel made peace with Jordan. Israel made peace with Egypt.
How is building settlements a commitment to
the Palestinians are currently, if there is a problem to be discussed regarding Jewish building of, if there is a problem to be discussed regarding the building of homes to Jewish people in areas of Jewish population, I'm answering it, but you shout over me, so you won't hear the answer. If there is a problem to be discussed
because you're not saying how that shows a commitment to a two-state solution.
If you don't let me finish the sentence.
Okay, well let's go to
Congressman.
The
two-state solution is simple in the sense that, well, if you let me, if you wouldn't mind me allowing me to answer the question, the situation is such that Benjamin Netanyahu, from very early on in his premiership, has said that he is willing and wants to make a two-state solution. He is willing to talk with the Palestinians. He has placed no preconditions.
How many homes do you have to demolish to get peace,
Jonathan? About the rockets that come out of Gaza into Israel, the rockets that are killing innocent people.
How many homes in Jerusalem
that got killed by Palestinians
does Israel have to demolish?
Okay, you're talking over each other. We can't hear you.
If that's the
I'm going to bring it back to the studio here to Congressman Baird. Two sides, very far apart here, seems to be intractable. One other thing, and that is, we keep talking about the two-state solution. Is that still possible, do you think?
It's marginally possible if action is taken now. But the problem with Jonathan's perspective is to say, well, we're negotiating, but as we're negotiating, we're doing things that prevent a lasting and just solution. Isn't honest. It's not sincere, and it's not honest, and it's not backed up with actions. The actions are backed up in the wrong direction. If you are saying, as Netanyahu and others have said, that they cannot be a shared capital of Jerusalem, if you're continuing to confiscate Palestinian land, if you're continuing to build separation walls around Palestinian villages and destroy their olive groves, you are not sincerely moving towards peace. There are a host of things the Israelis can do. They haven't done them, and lamentably, our country has not insisted that they do them. And until we do, the attitude has been that the United States is the essential partner. I'm afraid we have not been a partner acting in good faith. I'm saddened by that. We should be acting in good faith. We should insist that the Israelis adhere to international law. We should push for implementation of the Arab Peace Initiative, which is now as a counterpart in the Israeli Peace Initiative, not the official government one.
If I may, with respect to the congressman, I think this is extremely unfair to say that Israel has done nothing in order to try and build confidence and in order to kickstart peace negotiations again. Israeli Prime Minister after Israeli Prime Minister has tried to negotiate for peace, and the situation now is such that an unprecedented 10-month freeze on building was put in place. It was specified that it was a one-time action. It was specified that it was 10 months long.
Let me ask a question,
if I may.
Palestinians
spent 9 months
there was
of that
no
time
freeze.
doing nothing.
Well,
so when people are told,
Jonathan, the congressman has a question
constantly that they
Just hold on one moment. Congressman, go ahead.
The problem with what
Jonathan talking about?
What Jonathan is saying is going to appeal to people who don't know what's going on over there. But if you've actually been there, as I have and many have, what he's saying simply isn't true. And let me ask two questions. One, did actual construction stop during the so-called moratorium? That's point one. And two, is it not true that Shas and Betanu, it is their goal and the settlers movement's goal to actually have Israel extend all the way to the West Bank with the Palestinians and isolated surrounded community? Their express goal is not a two-state solution that's viable, but Israel extending to the West Bank. Is that inaccurate?
Well, with due respect, the other guest on today's program has written a book about how he doesn't believe in a two-state solution. There's no point in us probably
but I
arguing
do believe
over those
in
things.
equality,
we haven't got time
Jonathan.
for that today. The fact of the matter is that as Clinton has said herself, a two-state solution is going to be the only way that we can actually resolve the situation currently. You talk about separation between the peoples, you talk about these sorts of things, but it's also a known fact to anybody who's visited the area that what you call a wall is 90% defense, and its purpose has very successfully reduced the terrorist attacks, the suicide bombings that took place all the time in Israel, killing Israeli civilians. So, of course, Israel doesn't want to have to take such measures.
But there have been no terrorist
a passive measure that isn't the same as a military measure. There have been no serious attacks because the fence has been extremely successful. That's why there have been no serious attacks. Just in the last year, since the beginning of 2010, there have been 100 terrorist incidents on the border with Gaza.
Okay, Jonathan,
that is an average of three terrorist attempts a day.
All right, Jonathan, I'm going to give Ali Hassan Abunimah a chance to respond to what you've been saying. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, just to be clear that I support full equality for Israelis and Palestinians. I support international law, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a basis for peace and coexistence in historic Palestine for Israeli Jews and Palestinians, just to be absolutely clear. And when Jonathan talks about terrorism, well, let's remember that it is Israeli leaders who fear traveling to the United Kingdom because they may face arrest for the war crimes and crimes against humanity alleged and documented in the Goldstone report.
That's not true. There are no war crimes, and the law that you're talking about is currently being modified by the current coalition government in the UK, who are changing it so that it can't be abused by people who wish to hijack human rights law in order to reach their own political ends, like yourself.
Yes.
Okay, one at a time, please.
Well, right. Yes. So what Jonathan is telling us is that in order to protect Israeli war crime suspects from accountability, the Israel lobby has to pressure the UK government to change the law. And we know they've been doing that. And with respect to Congressman Baird, I would like to
from
say
a position of unique ignorance regarding the British government and its change of the universal jurisdiction laws.
Yes, we know that the United States-Israel lobby pressured Belgium to change its universal jurisdiction laws to protect Ariel Sharon from accountability, and now they're doing the same to change UK laws. And the
Palestinians need to sit down and negotiate with the Israelis. That's simply the only way that any of this will happen.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to take a break right now. Okay, we're going to have to take a short break right now. More of our discussion in just a moment. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Efforts to reach a Middle East peace deal have deadlocked, with the U.S. administration failing to persuade Israel to stop the construction of settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. I'm joined by Ali Abunimah, co-founder of Electronic Intifada, a non-profit online publication that covers the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jonathan Sacerdoti, independent commentator on Israel and the Middle East. He joins us from London. And here with me in the studio, U.S. Congressman Baird, who's been actively campaigning for peace in the region. Let me start this half of the show with Ali Hassan Abunimah. Let's look at the Palestinians. They are still very divided, aren't they? What kind of credibility does Mahmoud Abbas have right now?
Well, very little, of course, because he has abandoned any sort of legitimacy among the Palestinian people. He is essentially running an authority in Ramallah which is propped up by the United States and European Union funding. And there has been a deliberate exclusion of the Palestinian people from the peace process over recent years. What the peace process needs to do to achieve justice and peace is to refocus on the issue of Palestinian rights, rights for Palestinians in Israel who are currently second-class citizens, an end to the occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and the rights of refugees. And as Congressman Baird emphasized, holding Israel accountable to international law. That's the way to peace. You cannot bribe your way to peace with Israel. Israel has shown time and again that no matter what you give it, it will take it and continue to break the law and behave badly. Appeasement doesn't work with a rogue regime like Israel's.
Okay, let's go. Jonathan, let me ask you this. If Israel continues to build settlements and insists that even those settlements that are there right now will not be dismantled, there are currently something like 500,000 settlers living in the West Bank, how could there be a two-state solution?
I must just first take issue with something that Ali just said, if I may, which is simply that that's really a distortion of what's happened in the region. And, you know, there's no point in us sitting here having an argument and a slagging match about, you know, who took something and ran away and did something else with it. You know, let's not even mention total withdrawal from Gaza, which was followed not by what all the Israeli population hoped for,
Gaza is a prison camp.
Constantly into
Gaza
Israel. Let's not mention these issues. Instead of that, why don't we, please, I didn't interrupt you. I think just show some courtesy and allow other people to have their say. I think the fact of the matter is that Israel is committed to peace talks, and if all those issues that
1.5 million people living in prison in Gaza, and you think that's
saying are
a gesture for
important
peace?
to the please allow other people to have their say. You have told us what you think, and I'm trying to respond to it. The fact of the matter is that if these issues are of importance, the only way to resolve them and to sort them out is by negotiation. And the Palestinian people have had enough of extremism and have had enough of leaders who aren't living up to their expectations. As you yourself have said, the fact of the matter is that history and the Palestinian people will judge their leaders by their reluctance to sit down and take the opportunity to negotiate with the Israelis, which ultimately is the only way they will achieve their hope of having their own state. There is no other way. You cannot bomb your way to peace, and you cannot murder your way to peace with Israel. You must sit down at the negotiating table. If there's no desire to do that among the leadership is failing its people. And the
Thanks,
people
Jonathan.
of
Congressman
Gaza,
Baird, you want to get
the West
in there?
Bank deserve better than that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, there's so much to say about this. First of all, Israel's made a great effort to bomb its way to peace in Gaza. I've been there and seen the destruction. It's not a wall, Jonathan. It's a fence, and you know it, and I know it, and millions of people imprisoned by it know it.
No,
And
it is 90% of it.
It is a wall.
I have toured it.
The reality is, if it's made of concrete and it's 20 feet high, we could argue about it, Jonathan, but that's the problem. If you can sit there and tell people...
There are sections of it that are made of concrete and that are walls.
If you can tell
where
people...
the population centres are very close to each other. 90% of it is a fence. You're misrepresenting the truth, and there's no point in that.
What does it matter, Jonathan, what the prison walls are made of? They're still prison walls for the people, and people need to be free. You need to support
your rhetoric
freedom
might play
for
very well to
everyone,
certain
Jonathan.
audiences. Prisons, prison camps, prison walls. But you're disingenuous.
Jonathan,
they need to sit down and negotiate, not to sit
come
there
back.
saying
Jonathan,
prison,
if you're
prison,
going to
prison
negotiate
to each other. That's not helpful.
But Jonathan, if you're
You
going
don't
to
negotiate with your jailer, Jonathan.
Well, the other thing is you don't negotiate while someone's taking your land. Jonathan, mentioned earlier that the wall is up in order to protect the Israelis. There have been no significant terrorist attacks in Israel in a long time. The wall is, then if that's the case, why continue to expand the wall?
That's because the fence has been successful in keeping people out from Israel.
Why continue to expand it? But why continue to expand it? Why continue to confiscate Palestinian land?
I'll explain to you why. I'll explain to you why, Senator. Senator, allow me to explain to you why. The reason is that the fence is extremely important. It is the most successful, uniquely successful method by which the Israelis have protected their civilian population from attacks, which were frequent and indiscriminate. Just the very day of the start of the talks, which have now failed so far, just that very day, 4 Israelis were killed, including a pregnant woman. The wall didn't manage to protect those. The wall, as you call it,
Jonathan,
or the fence, as I call it.
Can I ask you a question?
It didn't achieve that.
Okay,
just one second.
Yes.
Allow me to say one more thing, which is that the separation fence between Gaza and Israel over the last year, since the beginning of 2010, has had an average of 3 terrorist activities caught on it on that very border.
Okay, Jonathan, you've had your say. I'm going to go now to Ali Hassan. He wants to say something. Ali Hassan, go ahead.
I agree with Jonathan that violence is absolutely deplorable and has to be stopped. We've lost too many innocent lives. And as Jonathan certainly knows, that since January 1st, 2008, the number of Israelis who've been killed in conflict-related violence has been about 60, and about half of those have been occupation soldiers outside Israel in the occupied territories. And that's terrible for all their families. The main reason so few Israelis have been killed has not been because of the separation wall. It's because all Palestinian factions have operated a one-sided ceasefire, which Israel has refused to accept. On the other side, in exactly the same period of time, since January 1st, 2008, Jonathan, I let you finish. Jonathan, I let you finish. Now let me finish.
Okay. It's not true what you're saying.
Well, let me finish. Yes.
Yeah.
Since January 1st, 2008, the number of Palestinians killed by the Israeli occupying forces with weapons supplied by the United States exceeds 2,000. And the vast majority of them are children and women. And for Jonathan to sit there and talk about security and not care about the security of the thousands of people who have been killed in Gaza in the past 10 years.
Gentlemen, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back to the studio here.
Because Israel has taken their land is very disingenuous.
I'm going to bring it back to the studio, to Congressman Baird.
Let me give you just one example of what's happening in Gaza. Since March, 17 children have been shot by high-powered rifles for the crime of gathering small stones to try to build aggregate that they're going to use in concrete. The blockade of Gaza, the encirclement and imprisonment of Palestinians in the West Bank, and the unequal treatment of people in Israel itself is absolutely unacceptable. Nobody on this program would advocate or tolerate the rocketing of civilians on either side. But I will tell you what, having been to both sides, to Sderot and to Gaza, it is absolutely disproportionate what has happened. The daily indignities that are suffered by the Palestinian people, the ability for the Israelis to say that if your child has brain cancer and wants to get... Jonathan, I have not interrupted you one time.
Okay, Jonathan,
I have not interrupted you one time.
We're going to have to end the program.
Blaming the victim, Jonathan.
10 seconds.
If a child with cancer can't have their parents accompany them to a hospital because the Israelis declare any parent a terrorist, it is immoral, it is unjust, and it is counterproductive. The United States should insist on the Arab Peace Initiative.
All right, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And thank you for being with us. A reminder, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. This week we're featuring a discussion on the impact of the WikiLeaks revelations. On the next show, financial freefall. As protests in Europe intensify against government spending cuts, we look at the future of the European welfare state. Make sure you tune in for that. See you next time.